What's up, you guys? Welcome back to Southern Draw Law. My name is James White, criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor, former police officer. So the reason for today's video is to do a follow-up on the original video that I did on the Sonya Massey shooting. I'm doing this so that I can do a slow motion breakdown of the actual body cam footage from both officers' perspectives. Now, I will not show the actual shooting, nor will I air the sound of the gunshots. So the reason I've decided to do this is because, to my surprise, I've had tons of trolls find their way to my comment section to call me out because I dared to describe the scene as it actually was and is supported by video evidence. Even though I made it clear at the beginning as well as the end of the video that I believe this was murder and I did a detailed legal analysis of the relevant law that leads us there, agenda-driven people cannot accept what the video objectively shows to be true, and many have challenged my take. Some even suggesting that I have some ulterior motive for saying that Sonya Massey dumped the water from the pot, which of course is nonsense. Some people, including regular viewers of my channel, have suggested that because of the way the pot is oriented in the still shots I provided in the video, they don't believe the pot could have had water in it. And that's probably my fault. Others have suggested that Massey dumped the pot into the sink and was holding an empty pot and using it as a shield. Now, some of those people are just people who will simply never accept the truth. And I'm not worried about those people. They are easy enough to ignore. But to the extent that I did not provide enough evidence to support what I was saying, and people need more information in order to draw a reasonably informed conclusion, I feel like I owe it to my audience to give you the rest of that information so that you can make an informed decision as to where you land on this case. So that's what I'm going to do. I will break down the video, at times frame by frame and in slow motion, in order to draw your attention to the physical evidence captured on video, which supports the conclusion I made. Now again, I need to make it perfectly clear. I do not think this was a justified shooting, but we have to arrive at that conclusion based on the facts, not based on our feelings about the police or anybody else. So we'll start the video where Grayson alerts his partner to the pot of water, and Massey responds by going over to the stove.
1 second.
Check on her.
Let me get this.
We don't need a fire while we're here.
When she first addresses the pot, you can see that she grabs pot holders that were hanging somewhere around her cabinet door or close to the stove. Some have suggested that while the partner's body cam pans to the corner, Massey actually emptied the water into the sink. Now, I don't believe that's true, and the reason is because you do not see steam rising out of the sink in any substantial way in any of the footage. If you listen to the audio, you can actually hear water running, but that's because she turned on the kitchen faucet. And we know that because the kitchen faucet continued to run well after she was shot. The fact is, if the majority of the water had been dumped, there would have been physical evidence of steam rising from the sink. I know that because of what I'll show you shortly in the video. Now, I can't say for sure that she didn't dump any of the water in the sink, but the video will show that there was steaming water in the pot after it was removed from the counter. Now, as we know, once the gun comes out, after Grayson made his threat to shoot her in the face, she threw her hands up and she ducked. So she ducks down out of camera view. And again, we are watching the backup deputy's body cam at this point. You can see Grayson begin to close the distance and come around the counter. And I want to stop the video here. We're at 1:20 and 47 seconds. If you look closely, you can see a black office chair protruding from the side of the counter that Massey is on. And in that same area, as I slow down the video, you can see that the floor is dry and it has a matte look to it with a glare reflecting the overhead light. The first shot happens almost contemporaneously with the clock rolling from 1:20 and 47 seconds to 1:20 and 48 seconds. And at the same time, you can see both water and steam rushing into the frame from behind the counter. Now, in response to this, the backup deputy retreats slightly and his view is obscured by the TV. But in the bottom left corner, you can still see the steam from the water. And you can see that there is steam hovering all the way up to the seat of the chair. You can also see that the floor is now wet. And in the black office chair, you can see the brown pot with steam still coming out of it, sitting in the chair. Now, that's the backup deputy's body cam. We know that Deputy Grayson did not turn on his body cam until after he fired the shot. Now, the way these body cams are set up, they generally back up some amount of time. So I don't know whether it's 30 seconds or a minute or what it is, but it did back up to just around the time that she's saying that she's going to rebuke him for the second time, and right before he pulls out the gun. So let's go to Grayson's body cam and we'll take a look. It starts right as he's making his threat. He draws his gun and you can see Massey respond. She throws her hands up in the air. She is wearing an oven mitt on her right hand, and from his camera you can actually see a little bit more detail. You can tell that she's wearing an oven mitt on her right hand and has a square pot holder in her left hand. They both appear to be white on one side and red on the other. She ducks in response to the gun being pointed at her at 1:20 and 45 seconds. 1 second later, at 1:20 and 46 seconds, Grayson begins closing the distance and starts to come around the counter. You can see the wheels of the same black office chair protruding from behind the counter. And you can see again that the floor is dry with a matte finish and a reflection from the overhead light. At around the 1:20 and 47 second mark, Grayson's arm is obstructing the view of Massey. But as he continues to close the distance, she comes back into frame. You can see that she's raising from a squatted position, and we're still at 1:20 and 47 seconds. Massey is seen holding the pot upright, and it appears to be supported by both hands, almost sitting on top of her right shoulder. Her right hand, still with the oven mitt, is on top of the pot, and the part of the mitt with her fingers is curled over the top of the pot. On the bottom of the pot, you can see the red side of the square pot holder held against the bottom of the pot, and Massey's bare hand is just on the other side of the mitt. So you have the pot, and then you have the mitt, and you have her hand holding the mitt against the pot to brace the weight of the pot and protect her hand. She keeps it held against the pot and protects her hand as she supports the bottom of it. As we go forward, you can see that Massey rotates the pot downward. The red mitt is still visible, and she removes the support hand with the square pot holder off the bottom of the pot, and she uses that hand to shield her head as she uses her right hand with the oven mitt to continue to push the pot forward and in a downward direction. The floor is still dry, and the first shot is fired just as the clock rolls from 1:20 and 47 seconds to 1:20 and 48 seconds. And just after the 1:20 and 48 second mark, you can see water and steam rush into the bottom left of the frame. At 1:20 and 49 seconds, you can see the steam start to rise, and the floor is visibly wet, and there's a hovering of steam over the entire area. From 1:20 and 49 seconds to 1:20 and 52 seconds, Grayson is calling out on the radio that shots have been fired, and his arm is obstructing the camera. Towards the end of the 1:20 and 52 second mark, some 4 seconds after the first shots are fired, his arm leaves the camera view and he begins to approach the victim. In the bottom left part of the frame, you can see the brown pot lying on its side in the seat of the black office chair with steam rising from it. He holds that position until the clock hits 1:21:08, and then he moves to where you can't see the pot anymore. Now, I highlight this information because the pot is still steaming visibly some 20 seconds after the shots are fired. Now, in fairness, it's not steaming as much, but it is still visibly steaming. This supports my earlier assertion that Massey did not empty the pot in the sink, at least not entirely, prior to being shot. Because if she had, there would have been visible steam rising from the sink, just as we saw visible steam rising from the floor for several seconds. And just as we saw visible steam rising from the pot after the shooting. Had a substantial amount of hot water been dumped into a concentrated small area where the sink was, you would have seen visible steam rising up from that location. And we didn't see that on the video. Now again, it's obvious that there is not as much steam 20 seconds later, but it is undisputable that there would have been noticeable steam had the pot been completely emptied into the sink. Moreover, had she emptied the pot entirely into the sink prior to the shots being fired, there would not have been any visible water and steam, as we just witnessed, on the camera moving into the camera frame around the time the shots have been fired. So it is just not physically possible that the water was not in the pot at the time that she started to turn it over. So again, this is not to support the police. It's just the truth. We have to deal with the truth even if we don't like it. So that's it. That's the breakdown. In closing, I know most of you guys don't know me personally, and you don't know what my subjective motives are, and I try to keep that in mind. But I want you to understand that I generally spend 6 to 8 hours on each video that I do. I do that to make sure that I fully understand the facts and that I fully understand the law, or at least have a really good grasp on it before I try to take a position. And I do that because I actually care what I say that has my name attached to it. I try really hard not to just be right, but to get it right, because I only care about getting it right. I don't have an agenda. I'm loyal only to the facts, and I genuinely try to be as objective as possible in my analysis. Since I published this video, even though the video only has around 2,500 views as of right now, I've had to block around 10 people from my channel for levying personal attacks against me simply because I said what was obviously true based on the video. And look, at the end of the day, I took the same position as most of the rest of you guys did. It was murder, and it was an unjustified shooting by a coward police officer. I just used the actual truth supported by video to come to my decision instead of my feelings. Sadly, one of the people I had to block was someone who has been watching my content for a couple of months, and someone who I've had multiple positive interactions with. This person, though, went so far that they suggested that I was peddling a lie in order to position myself so that I could try and represent Sean Grayson at trial. So, I'm only licensed in Tennessee, not Illinois. And I guess I need to say this so everybody can know it. But I wouldn't piss on that piece of human garbage if he was on fire. If he walked into my office with $1 million in hand, I would tell him that there is no amount of money that could cause me to defend him. I'd tell him that I, along with millions of Americans, witnessed him murder an innocent woman, and in so doing, he made every decent cop in America's job exponentially harder. Where does the vitriol attached to some of these comments come from? Well, for one, you have to remember that it really doesn't matter what I think about what happened or what you think about what happened. All that matters in the end, in a court of law, is whether the jury can put themselves in the shoes of a reasonable officer and determine whether or not a reasonable officer with the same level of experience in the same situation would have found that this lady posed a threat of death or serious bodily injury. If that jury says that a reasonable officer in the same situation would have found this a justified shooting, then he's going to walk. And if that jury thinks that no reasonable officer could have found that conduct justified under the circumstances, then he's going to be convicted of murder. And that's it. But the vitriol comes from people who just don't think that there are any reasonable police officers who exist. It comes from miserable people who are so blinded by their hatred of the police, or frankly anyone who doesn't share their exact thoughts on every issue. And they instantly take offense to any notion that someone else could hold a valid opinion other than theirs. They are so fixated on their narrative that they play what I like to call adult peekaboo with the truth. You know how a little kid will stand in the middle of a room and they'll cover their eyes and they'll say, "I'm gone," and they'll try to convince themselves and you that they are not actually there because they have their eyes covered? That's what miserable, echo-chambered, narcissistic adults do too. In adult world, we just call it gaslighting instead of peekaboo, but it's the same thing. They care so much about being right and convincing people that they are right, that they're willing to manipulate any fact and any person into believing the narrative. They're even willing to tell you that what you see isn't real and that something different is happening. It's one of those, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? What people have to understand is that you don't have to create a narrative or a situation that doesn't actually exist in order for this to be wrong. It's wrong. It's not justified. And just because you want to be right about it, or you want to have a conspiracy theory, or whatever it is, that doesn't make you actually right. And you know who else probably thinks they're always right? The guy who referred to his partner as dipshit after his partner was the only one who wanted to provide medical aid and wanted to hold pressure against the lady's head as she was taking her last breath. The guy who discouraged his partner from rendering aid because he knew there was no use in wasting his medical kit on a crazy bitch who set the whole thing up. Yep. That piece of trash right there. In his mind, he's the one who's got it all figured out, he's squared away, and the rest of us are just dipshits and idiots. His Army discharge for serious misconduct, his 2 DUIs, his journeyman law enforcement career with murder as a capstone. Yep, everyone else is the problem. And many of the people trolling on YouTube, being ugly, launching ad hominem attacks for no reason, constantly marinating in misery and projecting it onto other people, they think exactly the same way as Sean Grayson. They just don't happen to have a badge and a gun to use against other people. So, I happily say farewell to those people as soon as they reveal themselves to me. I put way too much time and energy into making decent, honest, and authentic content for someone to act that way towards me and believe they can continue to benefit from the information that I put out for free. So if that's your game, then you can get blocked just like the others. Call it being thin-skinned or whatever you want. I don't care. These are the numbers. YouTube pays me $3 or less for every 1,000 views on my content. Based on my current schedule, I will put out about 150 videos a year. That means that a person has to watch every single video that I make for 6.5 years before I'll make $3 on their viewership. And that, if you haven't guessed, is nowhere close to enough to put up with nonsense by somebody who can't take 5 minutes to figure out who I am as a person and don't want to watch enough of my content to try to figure it out either. I don't care enough about money to sell out my principles for the sake of being popular. I have no issue with people having a different opinion than me, but if your opinion is not based on fact, then you have to understand that nobody's going to take you seriously. That's why these people don't have the ability to persuade anyone. All they do is stand and make loud noises, and people will just eventually tune them out. Because part of their entire game is that they ask honest people to betray the truth and ignore what's right in front of their faces just to see it their way. Anyway, I still think Sean Grayson is a coward. His killing of Sonya Massey was objectively unreasonable. We also now know that the water was already spilling when he shot her, and if she had the ability to burn him with it, he would have gotten burned. That shows definitively that she was no serious threat to him whatsoever. Anyway, thanks for listening to my rant. Please remember to either subscribe or unsubscribe based on how you feel about what I just said. If you're interested in watching the original video with my legal breakdown and the analysis and you haven't seen it, I'll leave a link to it at the end. Until I see you again, take care. Always film your interactions with the police and keep your evidence to yourself.